BlueGreen Water Technologies was founded 12 years ago. The mission statement is to make water safe. And we decided to start with something very, very small, which is known as harmful algal blooms, blue-green algae, red tide. It comes in different names. Essentially, it's a problem of biodiversity when a single toxic microorganism is taking over entire aquatic ecosystems. And refer to it as a disease of water, ultimately turns water into dead aquatic zones. And it's as bad as it sounds. So under bloom conditions, you can't use the water for anything. You can't use the water for recreation, for drinking, fishing, even irrigation. Everything is becoming very, very problematic. There are huge environmental consequences from a blooming water source that result into humanitarian and socioeconomic aspects that are associated with relying on contaminated water bodies, all the way down to potential geopolitical implications. And you can see those examples in the Kashmir region between Pakistan and India, or whether it is where water creates conflict between Syria and Turkey, or in Mexico and the United States. These problems are amplified through harmful algal blooms that cover tens of millions of lakes around the world and tens of millions of square kilometers of ocean.
Welcome to the Ageas podcast. Buckle up. This episode is brought to you by Better Weight for Life, transformational weight loss aid, led by U.S. board-certified physicians, providing access to GLP-1 medications like Wegovy and Zepbound that are proven to help you lose weight and keep it off. This episode is brought to you by CardsBiz, a business card too good to give away.
So this is cards. This is what we make in CardsBiz. This is the black Amex of business card, made out of metal, glass polymer, engraved in real gold or silver. And basically you don't give this away. You basically tap somebody's phone and the information is shared. So like you make the best impression in every meeting.
Hello, Eyal.
Hello, Hagai.
So Eyal is today gonna talk about something that is essential for life on Earth. It makes up 70% of all human beings, right? 70%? 70% human beings. Yet I think for the most part, at least in the Western world, we take it for granted as a given. And that is water. So Eyal, before we jump into this to discussion, like what is your relations to, what is...
I drink it, I wash in it, and I happen to have the privilege of traveling around the world, in some places, the armpits of the world that suffer most from issues associated with water safety, to see just how bad it is. In some places, even water sources that is distributed ultimately to wealthy communities, they don't even know how bad it is for them. And this is a privilege to be able to go to these places and offer assistance. But it also highlights the fact that a small company from Israel with a little bit presence in other places around the world is trying to tackle a problem that us and 1,000 companies like us should be tackling at the same time.
So let's frame it for the audience. What is this company? Because somebody might think we're talking about an NGO or some charity operation. But this is a capitalist endeavor. So what is this company?
Sometimes it feels like working as an NGO without getting all the glory of an NGO.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I guess we'll get to that, where you get the money from and whether you even get the money at all. So that's a big if. Yeah, so BlueGreen Water Technologies was founded 12 years ago. The mission statement is to make water safe. So that's a very broad mission statement. And we decided to start with something very, very small, which is known as harmful algal blooms, blue-green algae, red tide. It comes in different names. Essentially, it's a problem of biodiversity when a single toxic microorganism is taking over entire aquatic ecosystems. You can refer to it as a disease of water that ultimately turns water into dead aquatic zones. And it's as bad as it sounds. So under bloom conditions, you can't use the water for anything. You can't use the water for recreation, for drinking, fishing, even irrigation. Everything is becoming very, very problematic. There are huge environmental consequences from a blooming water source that result into humanitarian and socioeconomic aspects that are associated with relying on contaminated water bodies, all the way down to potential geopolitical implications. And you can see those examples in the Kashmir region between Pakistan and India, or whether it is where water creates conflict between Syria and Turkey, or between Mexico and the United States. These problems are amplified through harmful algal blooms that cover tens of millions of lakes around the world and tens of millions of square kilometers of ocean.
So just to paint a picture to the lay person, and including myself, and when I was when I was researching for this call, I just want to make sure that I understand and the people listening understand. So what you're talking about is when my pool, like I forget to put chloride in it. It's like I flew for vacation for a few months. I come back and it's this disgusting swamp. Is this what we're talking about?
Well, a pool is not a good example because a
No,
pool,
a body of water, but like about yeah.
yes. So the answer is yes, to the point that you can see bacteria with the naked eye from space.
Yeah, the naked eye for space, and so I'm just so like this disgusting greenish. I don't want my children near it kind of situation. Okay, so so I think a lot of people, unless people that have pools or body well, can at least imagine like what we're talking about, things like that. But like, how big is the problem, and where does it show up?
So roughly 50% of water bodies around the world are either eutrophic or hypereutrophic. In other words, they are overproductive, which means there's too much nutrients in the water, and with global warming and carbon in the atmosphere, and we can go into all, each of them is kind of a single contributor to the overall problem. Lakes and oceans are starting to overproduce, which means at the microbial level, bacteria and algae start to grow on steroids, taking over the entire ecological niche. And as with any problem with biodiversity, when a single anything becomes becomes very dominant to the point that everything else collapses, is when you're having an ecological problem at your fingertips. This is true in any healthy ecological and biological system. It is much more so in water because water in and of itself is a low common denominator in many different aspects of the world as we know it. So when that piece of the overall ecological framework or pyramid collapses, everything else cascades and further collapses. So if the micro, if at the microbe level the water is unhealthy, then it's unhealthy for fish, and therefore it's unhealthy for birds, and therefore it's unhealthy for humans and bigger and other big wildlife. And so everything cascades from that, and this is why a single problem of biodiversity turns into, from an environmental issue, into a humanitarian or overall socioeconomic problem, and the ripple effect that goes from there.
So I want to go back to kind of the questions. I think we understand the downside of this, but how common is it, or how prevalent is this, and where does it happen?
Quick answer.
It's in terms of where human beings.
Yes, but not only. Think of harmful algal blooms as a water pandemic. When it's left untreated, it'll get worse. And so it does. And what you're seeing around the world is tens of millions of contaminated lakes and tens of millions of square kilometers of ocean. So yeah, sure, you will see it more pronounced in areas where there is more human activity or more systemic contamination, but not only. And there are different reasons for that. So for example, global warming, it's getting warmer under warmer conditions, just like, with food. Bacteria likes to grow where it's warmer. So that's why we're using the fridge to put our food in, to keep it not wasted for longer periods of time. So when it's getting warmer, it's more comfortable to those microorganisms. Carbon in the atmosphere. Most of the carbon that we keep emitting into the atmosphere ends up in water. So it's not just a problem in the atmosphere, it's also a problem in water, because water is a natural regulator. If you think about photosynthesis, for example, kind of opening a different angle, but it's very, very important to the conversation. What's photosynthesis? So we know about photosynthesis in forests, but we don't really think about the fact that photosynthesis happens even more so in water. And 50%, kind of just as an anecdote to understand to what extent, 50% of the oxygen we breathe was generated in the water by 0.5% of the total plant material on Earth, which is bacteria and algae. Just shows you how effective they are in doing photosynthesis. Now, what's photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is 6 molecules of water and 6 molecules of carbon. There's a lot of water in water. Now, there's a lot of carbon in water, which acts as a fertilizer to more photosynthesis, which means the oceans and the lakes of the world are getting greener. And that's in bad.
But give it a sense, like, how big is the problem? Also, like, so I think you're doing a very good job of kind of explaining of like that it's happening and the dangers of it. But like, what's the scale of it, and where is it meeting human beings? At what point is it meeting human beings?
Everywhere.
Okay.
In some places more than others.
So that's some extreme examples. So if you can pull up some extreme examples.
Sure. So you can find, so first of all, you will see it more often in places that are warmer than otherwise, where it's more sunny than otherwise. Again, photosynthesis. You will see it more often than not in places that are more systemically contaminated. So usually, the global south, where there are less rules and regulations in place to prevent systemic contamination. So where you see sewage is flowing in, or stormwater is left untreated before it reaches natural waterways. So there are different aspects that will accelerate the problem. And yet you will also find it in Europe, and you will find it in the United States in many states, and you will find it in places that are cold. You will find it in the ice caps that are melting. You'll find it everywhere, because at its core, the bacteria and the algae responsible for harmful algal blooms is the underlying building blocks of the world as we know it. So they're everywhere. Not only in water, by the way. You can find cyanobacteria at the crust of the desert. So it's everywhere. And so they're already there. The problem, or the solution, if you want, because again, a lot of good things in the world are the result of what they did. They invented photosynthesis. The reason we're breathing oxygen is due to them from an evolutionary perspective 4.5 billion years ago. But when you're looking at the overall spread and breadth of the problem, it's everywhere. Usually when it's a little bit warmer, when it's a little bit more contaminated, but not only.
What's the most extreme example that it has affected humans' lives to date? Are you aware of? Or this?
Well, because it depends. There are places where it's really, really bad, but you will never know about this because these are poor communities, and
And what happens? And what happens in those poor communities? So I'm assuming you're referring to the water source in that case.
Yeah, I'm talking about water source. I'm talking about your lakes and oceans.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So you can have a very bad bloom in South Africa, for example, where we operate, and won't get anybody's attention really, unless, for example, in one of the cases where they called us, when you have an international rowing competition and they don't meet the international standard for water quality and safety.
And that's a wake-up call for
drinking that water. That's fine, but if the rest of the world is coming to compete in the water, now we need to treat it. So it tells you something a little bit about priorities as well, and that's part of why this is so disturbing.
So that's actually an interesting example. So that there's a lot of places people are just not aware of it because of what, standards or
people scream enough, or people with rich enough people make enough noise in order to make it a niche. So one of the examples you can take, and one of the places that are more advanced in dealing with harmful algal blooms is actually the state of Florida. And the reason is that Florida, as most of the listeners probably know, has more water than land. And Florida is very fertile. So there is a connect that many times people do between agriculture in algal blooms, because people see that there are more blooms in places where there is more agriculture. And so people think, not entirely incorrectly, that the agriculture industry is over fertilizing, which ends up in waterways. Therefore, you have more algal blooms. Therefore, it's the agriculture industry's fault. Again, I'm not advocating for over fertilizing, but you have to remember, why did the agriculture industry end up in that location in the first place? And the answer is because the land is fertile, which the problem is baked into the geological formation of that place, right?
Because it's fertile, because it's healthy, more bacteria can grow in.
Fertile means you throw a seed into the land and it'll grow irrespective of anything. Fertile, it has a lot of nutrients inside, which is good for agriculture. And what's good for agriculture is also good for photosynthetic bacteria or algae in the water. And so the problem in these locations is often related to geological preconditions that you don't really influence. Or sure, I mean, if there is a lot of agriculture and you over fertilize and all that, it's contributing, but it's not really the underlying cause, which is why you're also seeing algal blooms happening in places that don't have any human activity because of these aspects. Of course, it'll take longer time for the entire system to collapse, but you will see it everywhere. So back to your question, the state of Florida Governor DeSantis 6 years ago coming into or realized they had a really big problem. It happened after a very bad year in 2018, where they were having massive blooms inland and massive blooms on the ocean side and massive bloom on the Gulf side. And from all directions, the state was attacked by algal blooms. And they decided this is the thing they want to tackle strategically. So when Governor DeSantis came into office, he decided he will start an initiative that he nicknamed, very creative, the BlueGreen Algae Task Force. And for the first time, sorry?
Very descriptive. Very.
Yes. And they started budgeting and thinking about this systemically. How are we dealing with this problem that is making Floridians' lives so miserable? And because there's so much water in Florida and because the water is so contaminated, again, not necessarily because of somebody's broken septic tank, or definitely not because the sewage system of Miami is pouring into some lake, or because it's not. So this is coming because, lots of water, very fertile environment. Yeah, also a little bit of agriculture and all that. And so everything is blooming.
Warm climate, very warm climate. I lived in Miami for a few years in my life. It's very warm. Yeah.
So classic conditions, and guess what? Everything is blooming. So, and what is Florida known for other than contaminated water? This is the place where every wealthy enough American wants to go retire. And where does everybody want to retire? They want a front lake view.
Beachfront, yeah.
Whether it's the beach or a lake or a stormwater, and all of these are contaminated. So this is becoming a big issue. And so the governor sees this also as a political challenge, puts a lot of money and effort into this. And guess what? If you're looking at the United States as a whole, or even at the world as a whole, Florida is probably leading in terms of dollars and cents in the fight against algal blooms. By the way, another example, just to finish the point, is probably wouldn't be the first name you'd think about, environmentally sensitive and all of that, but China has a huge water problem. Desertification problem, not enough water to feed and quench the thirst of 1.3 billion people. And so they're very sensitive about water in China, and outspends the world in monitoring and actually doing something about it. They're not very effective about what they're doing, but they're at least trying. And this is very impressive. And I have to say this because most people don't even try, or most countries don't even try.
So let's bring it, I think, to kind of, we outlined the scope of the problem. So let's bring it into so like, how do you guys tackle this? And so it's a two-phase question. How do you tackle it? And why the hell did you even think about tackling this problem?
How much time do we have?
As long as we need.
All right. So let's start with why. So the original solution came from a brainstorming between three academics. One of them happens to be my older brother, and two professors from the Hebrew University. And they all spent a good chunk of their career researching cyanobacteria, which is the underlying problem of most of the harmful algal blooms on land in freshwater. Realized this is a mega problem. I'm talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in damages. This is conservative around the world. So many communities are suffering from this. So many people don't have access to safe water. So it's a huge, huge, huge unmet need. And yet there's no solution. Very small scale solutions, but those don't amount to nothing. And really no solution. And it's getting worse by the year, right?
Yeah.
Because remember, it's an untreated pandemic. It gets worse by the year. So massive problem. A couple of academics, this is what they do. They're trying to figure out how to solve the world's problems. And they came up with a stupidly genius idea, or a geniusly stupid idea, depends how you want to frame it, which when we started looking into, kind of made a huge amount of sense that could solve the problem. And so we started, we put some money together, we ran quickly to file for a patent. That was in 2013, the first patent. 2014, we started the company, and we thought once we'll just communicate our solution to this huge problem, we'll immediately exit, because everybody is going to want the solution, right? Big mistake. And then we thought, if we only develop a product and we'll show that it works in small scale, then we'll make the exit.
But what was the solution? Can I skip it? Like, what was the solution?
Fast forward 12 years, these are solutions that complement each other. Water is complicated. We'll get to that. One of the reasons why nobody has ever developed solutions for lakes and oceans. Think about it. Can you imagine something that is being used at the scale of a lake or in the ocean? There's nothing out there, right? So conceptually, it was an insane undertaking. And fast forward, it evolved into multiple layers that together can rehabilitate entire aquatic ecosystems. But at the very, very core, it was novel formulations that allowed us to surgically trigger a biological chain reaction within those toxic communities that is causing them to want to die. Or in other words, we irritate them in a very smart and gentle way. We irritate them to the point that they
You annoy them to death. You chemically annoy them to death.
exactly they kill themselves, chemically cause them to undergo a collective suicide. The entire toxic population collapses. And what happens from this point on, that's what happens when you give, and this is the most optimistic thing I can say, and I've seen this happening in in huge scale many times. The most optimistic thing I can say about climate change, global warming, and generally all the bad things that we're seeing that are happening to nature. If we only give nature a fighting chance, it fights and fast. And I can give many examples for that. So this is what's so exciting about this. Once you take the dominant toxic species and you kill them, then you see immediately afterwards, you see beneficial non-toxic species take over the ecological niche, recreating biodiversity. And I told you, this is a low common denominator. So when under algae blooms, you have a negative feedback loop that collapses everything else. When you fix that basic problem, you start seeing everything else come back to life. And this is why this is so exciting. So this was a very basic layer of innovation that we developed. And on top of that, we developed additional technologies, including the ability to remote sense biological conditions from space, because we're just simply working in too large environments to be able to understand what's even going on there without the use of satellite. But these are kind of complementary additions that allow us to control biological conditions in entire aquatic ecosystems.
So how about just so we have a complete picture, can you walk us through like a case study, like maybe the Satumo Dam, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, in South Africa, or the Mantua in Utah, and like the steps from the first phone call, like, and who calls you, to the last water sample.
The Satumo Dam is a classic situation. It's a 4 square kilometer, about 1,000 acres in surface area. Very, very poor community on the border of Botswana, systemically contaminated. So 500,000 people of Mafikeng, their sewage is flowing uninterrupted into the lake from one side, and drinking water is drawn from the other side. Talk about recycling. It's really, really bad. The water conditions are so bad that despite the fact that it's probably the only reason for any tourist to be there, none comes because the water conditions are really, really bad. They don't even have a public ramp. There's no boats in the water because nobody wants to touch the water with a stick. In the drinking water facility, half of the time water doesn't go through because there's too much biomass in the water. The water that does go through doesn't go through very rigorous treatment process to the point that they don't even measure cyanotoxins in the water. And mind you, these are very potent toxins. So people are literally getting contaminated water down the taps. And so, all sorts of problems around that. So really at every layer, from the environment to the humanitarian aspect, to the socioeconomic potential that is missed, to the ability to even generate water to these people, everything collapses around such a heavily contaminated lake. And the reason we went there was we did before that, we did a project in Rue de Platem in South Africa, and that was more of a localized kind of a treatment. And when we were having conversations with the South African government and the local ministerial departments, we wanted to show them our capability to systemically control an entire aquatic ecosystem. And what we usually like to do when we come to someplace new and they're skeptical because what we're offering is unheard of and never been even attempted before. So we come to these places and say, okay, what's your worst? I mean, take us to the place where if you tried anything, it definitely didn't work. So at least I can comfortably claim success. And those make the best befores and afters. So that's pretty cool. And they sent us to Satumo Dam. So we said, fine, Satumo Dam it is. Didn't know anything about this, by the way. Came to the lake. Complete disaster. So bad, up to the point that you can see bacterial colonies the size of a tennis ball.
Oh my God.
Really,
That's
really
disgusting.
bad.
That's disgusting.
Disgusting, stinking, year-round, ugly, toxic green. Like I said before, people are getting toxic water. We have a really cool picture of our bathtub in a very good hotel in the city where the water is green. And that's treated water after everything. So really, really, really bad. And because, like I said, there's no public ramp or anything, we even
Yeah.
from an operational perspective, it was a challenge because we couldn't even put a boat in the water. So what do you do? Well, we figured, nah, let's try a helicopter. So we had to develop an entire methodology around deploying our product with the helicopter. It was really, really cool and a lot of fun, but that's a different story. And so when we come to a situation like this that is as bad as it is, still you need to really understand, the sources of contamination. We call those lakes our patients. We really need to understand what the situation there. And the only way to do it really, not only spatially, so what's happening in a lake, because a lake is not a unit. Water is a fast changing, chaotic biological environment. So, if you go 20 feet in that direction or 20 feet in that direction or a couple of feet below, you'll get very different results and they change all the time. How do you even define the problem, let alone define a roadmap to approach the problem and understand after you've treated what has happened and is it going in the right direction? So, like I said before, we developed remote sensing capabilities, and at the time they were still in the diapers. And this is 2021, so this was still work in progress. But still, we could get kind of an idea about what's going on. And then another advantage that you get from satellite is you can get historical data. So you can also kind of understand how this thing has evolved. And sure enough, you see that the lake has been deteriorating over the years, and you see this around the world everywhere. They deteriorate. And you can see the deterioration. When we came in June 2021, the situation was really, really. And so we were able to define a treatment protocol. Treatment was done with a helicopter, really cool. And we dosed the lake. And from that point on, you're basically letting nature do its thing. So there are three things that are happening over time. The first thing, immediate thing that is happening, of course, the product that we put in the water is based on the active ingredient is hydrogen peroxide. So it breaks into water and oxygen, but hydrogen peroxide itself is reactive. So if it comes in contact with the cell, it will kill it. But it's not enough I mean, we're not trying to bleach the lake. We're trying only to kill the toxic species in the water. So this is not going to be a swimming pool. So we're not putting enough H2O2 in the water to begin with. But in the initial minutes to hours, and really that's the time scale,
Okay.
starting to see already directly impacted cells getting bleached, so they will die, and you can see that immediately with the naked eye. And what will happen shortly thereafter, you'll start seeing the programmed cell death, this annoyance process within those toxic communities starting to cause the entire toxic population to collapse. So from minutes to hours, some of the cells will get bleached. Hours to days, the entire toxic population starts to collapse. And then days to weeks, non-toxic species take over. And so what's really nice,
quick. That's quick.
it's very quick. And what's really nice about it is when you're looking at this from a historical perspective, and the reason I'm giving you these examples because this is already 4 years ago, what you can really see, first of all, you can see the difference in water quality with the naked eye within weeks, which is already pretty amazing. But the part that we were not really expecting, because remember, this is a systemically contaminated lake, and they didn't stop sewage from running in, right? So it still is being
and that was the source of contamination. In fact, that's the dumping sewage. Okay.
Yeah. So, and they didn't stop this. And despite the fact when you're opening Zoom and you're looking what happened since then, you see that water quality is 1,000 times better than it was before treatment, even now 4 years later. Now, this has nothing to do at this point with the treatment that we applied 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, everything to do with biodiversity. So this is how, instead of trying to fix nature with outside means, you're basically trying to piggyback on natural processes to let nature work for you. And this is, I think, what was so genius about the concept that we invented was the ability to harness nature to do the heavy lifting.
So if like I'm going to say it in a very basic way. So tell me where I'm if and where I'm getting this wrong. So basically, you go to a place and it has a zombie plague, and that zombie plague is in the force of there's no biodiversity because basically there's a zombie bacteria or combination of bacteria that basically took over and are like making it into a disgusting biohazard of a swamp. And you come in, you irritate that zombie infection to death, commit suicide, and the lack of this aggressive, biological presence basically enables nature to come and say, hey, there's there's this and this, and there's other life forms that can take space, and that basically kind of basically recollaborates the ecosystem to a healthier place. So even if you don't continue the treatment, it's just like the benchmark has gone up now, and it will take more time to go back to the zombie apocalypse it was before.
Exactly.
Okay.
And of course, and ideally, this is, and this is a concept that we're still nurturing and trying to develop. Once you've been able to restart the ecological equilibrium in the water, keeping it like that now is much easier. Because
Okay.
obviously now the bad bugs, the toxic bacteria needs to start from a situation where now they need to compete with other bugs, and the other bugs are not suckers. They won't just let the toxic species take over the ecological niche. They're competing over the same resources. So this is good, because they're biologically fighting each other. Now, the toxic species have an evolutionary edge, which is why we're seeing blooms popping up all over the world. They will ultimately overtake the ecological niche in all likelihood. But they have to start from a much lower baseline.
Yeah.
So ideally, what should happen from that point onwards is to keep it like that.
So in an ideal world, how often would you come back to that?
Impossible to say.
Okay.
The honest answer is it's impossible to say. And why? It goes back to the definition of the problem. Water is a fast-changing, chaotic biological. I can show you many places. Israel is classic. We work with hundreds of different irrigation reservoirs around Israel. Many of them are literally one next to the other with the same source of water. So you would expect to see the same biological
Similar.
conditions.
Yeah.
Other places, not at all. Why? Because this part has a tree over, that part more birds went through and pooped inside, and so many different reasons, and you end up with very, very different biological conditions in any particular lake. And this is even before making the problem even more complicated. What's even the definition of a lake, right? Because that side of the lake is not the same as the other side of the lake. So now what? So the definition of the problem is quite complicated even to wrap your head around before you're starting even to solve it, right? So this is why this is so challenging.
So if I understand correctly, your solution is much more like a SWAT team kind of thing. So if it's like, if a situation is very, very extreme, it's very clear because you just have to go in full force, full gun ho, and take care of it. But in situations when it's, let's say, in between, it's a lot more assess, plan, execute, or not even, or even wait. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, it's actually easier than that in the sense that usually when you have an algae bloom, you know that you have an algae.
I mean, you see that.
See.
So what I think, what I'm trying to get to, it's almost, and I'm starting moving to the business side of this conversation, which is that, okay, so it's very clear if there's an zombie Armageddon situation, very clear, they should call the Eyal hotline, come and save me, right? And you come, you assess, you plan a deployment.
So to piggyback on your zombie apocalypse scenario, okay?
Yeah.
Assume you don't have a single type of zombies, but you have multiple types of zombies. One of them is human-eating zombies.
Yeah.
The other ones don't.
Yeah.
They compete with the human-eating zombies over the same resources other than humans, and they're vegetarian for all other purposes. And in a bloom condition, it's all human-eating zombies. Now, the minute that you suppress the number of the human-eating zombies, and sorry for saying the word zombie so many times on a podcast, then the vegetarian zombies take over, making it very difficult for the human-eating ones to come back. And so when they start coming back, what do? Do you sit back and say, okay, let's see how they compete and wait until they swarm the entire land all over again? Or when it's this small, then we kneecap them and keep things in a manageable way. And this is what we're trying to advocate. We always say, don't wait for the catastrophe.
You have a solution for that, and you have a solution for that?
Absolutely.
The same tool set, just used differently?
Question is, it's actually a much cheaper tool set because it's the same. The means for intervention is the same, but it's cheaper because you don't need now you don't need to reset from here. Now you're resetting from here, and your ability to control is much better and more effective because what happens when you're allowing an algae bloom to take over, I mentioned this before, so many other processes in water decline and deteriorate. So the ability of nature to fix it will, but the ability of nature to fix itself is also starting from a lower baseline. So what
Yeah.
you should want from an ecological perspective, and I'm saying
Yeah.
this against my business interest,
Yeah.
is fix it when it's small.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't wait for it to.
A bit of prevention is, a gram of prevention is worth a ton of cure. So let's continue down the business angle here. So, okay, real problem. Like, I know you threw billions of dollars in damages, like real human impact, both for bad or good, depending on the status, like affecting people's life and health in many ways, which probably also has an economical impact, let's say. So why is your solution not everywhere? Because as far as I know, this is not widely deployed.
Right. And this is where we're starting to talk about the overarching problem, which is water security and by proxy food security, and why nobody does much about it. And this is where we're having a broken ecosystem. It was true. It was very true before, and I'm seeing some signs of it getting better in the last couple of months, maybe 1 year.
Yeah.
So let's start with the problem. The problem is nobody cares about water, and less so willing to pay for water. Water is like air. People think that clean air is an entitlement for all the right reasons, by the way. It's a right. They're not expecting to pay for air, and they don't. And that's kind of the sense when it comes to water. Now, sure, there are investments in water treatment, but those are limited to the secondary issues that come with water that meet us at home, right? So we don't want sewage in the streets, and we do want to be able to drink water and stay alive. But when you take the problem outside of the pipes and not ignore is not important, but ignore the aspect associated with drinking water facilities, wastewater treatment, and perhaps a little bit of desalination, and you look at the overall broader problem of lakes and oceans, and there's nothing there, absolutely nothing. And there's a classic example just to show how little people are willing to invest in water, and that is irrigation. For those of you not familiar with the numbers, most of the water consumption around the world, hands down, water for irrigation, right? That's how we get our food. Anything that is put on our table starts with water. And in irrigation, how do people irrigate today? In the most wasteful possible way, even and maybe even more so in places that have water shortages, in the most wasteful possible ways, through flood canals and sprinklers, and huge waste of water. Now, there's a very easy way to fix this, but it costs money. Drip irrigation, invented decades ago. Multiple companies around the world are doing this. It's not even that expensive to deploy, but it's more expensive than just opening a little
dam.
Allowing water to flush. What's the overall market share of drip irrigation in the overall irrigation market? It's a low single-digit percentage. It's nothing. Nobody does that. Where are the markets where you will see it most? Places where the government is subsidizing them, because at the government level, they came to the conclusion they have to switch, otherwise they're running out of water. But otherwise, nobody else does.
Yeah.
So it kind of gives you an idea that there is a market failure that doesn't meet policy, that ends up with no water into those resources. So they are depleting and they are getting contaminated, and nobody's doing anything about it.
Why?
And so here comes the challenge.
Which is like why? People okay, I'll tell you what, I understand, okay. There are states in the United States, and there are countries in Europe, which I'm a little more familiar, and I'm sure the other countries, that through policy, right, and social norms, are pushing other climate policies, right? You can argue some of them are good, some of them are bad, some of them do the reverse what they're intending, right? But put it aside. Budgets, efforts, regulations, policy, and norms changing to affect around carbon, around energy sources. And again, I don't want to debate what works and what doesn't, but the fact is they're doing it. So why not the same thing in water? And specifically in where you operate?
Fast forward, it's happening. That's what I was starting to say, that that I see this in the last very few years, especially in the last 12 months. You're starting to see governments heading the effort to find solutions in water. You're starting to see that. You're starting to see companies coming under fire for overusing water. In the past, you would hear about this, especially, from bottling companies. Coca-Cola has a bottling plant somewhere and they're using so much water that no lake. Okay, that's an easy
Yeah.
an easy target. But nowadays, data centers use water like there's no tomorrow.
For people who don't know, for what purposes? Why data centers and water?
For cooling purposes, data centers require a lot of energy, and a lot of energy requires a lot of water.
Yeah.
So they're all interrelated. And this heavy use of water is creating real challenges in places that already have problems with their water resources, quantity and quality. And so these are becoming issues that those companies are required more and more to deal with. So sometimes they do it out of their, I don't want to say out of their the goodness of their heart, or call it corporate social responsibility, or just being, smart with their stakeholders to say, hey, look, we understand we're creating a problem. Let us do something good around it, whether we can, for example, invest in drip irrigation. Therefore, you will use less water and we will subsidize that. Or by saying, we can't bring back the water, but we can improve the water quality that is there. And therefore engage in projects like that. This is something that is happening right now. And this is very encouraging. But let's go backwards for a second to the mission statement in a situation where you don't have a market because there are no technologies. So we are stuck in a vicious cycle. Why? Because if there are no technologies or capabilities to deal with problems associated with lakes and oceans, and there haven't been any, therefore there is no market for those problems, even if potentially there could be. Now, if somebody comes with a nice idea, as we did, and very naively thought we'll exit so quickly, right? And you go to a venture capital fund, first of all, very few would even understand water. Those that understand water in pipes, but not really what water means in surface water, in lakes and oceans.
Yeah.
And even if they want to do that leap of thought, their entire ecosystem of analyzing an investment completely collapses because you can't compare it to anything.
Yeah.
No comparables, no multipliers, no total addressable market, no nothing. And so when you're starting to have those conversations, you see your investors, your potential investors running away screaming, not because you didn't develop a good solution that you can easily show them working. I used to say, the easiest due diligence. Let me show you how I clean up a lake, right? Wasn't about that. The business model, they couldn't wrap their heads around. And so very easy, it's very difficult to get funded. And if it's very difficult to get funded, then you don't have new technologies to come after you. And if you don't have technologies, then you don't have them. And it's a vicious cycle. So it's feeding itself. So the only way to break it, as you pointed out in the carbon markets, for example, is government intervention. The minute governments start realizing that there is a market failure here, capitalism doesn't work here as it should, put subsidies in place, and this is classic place where subsidies need to be placed, then you'll start building the ecosystem after which the VCs can come and say, okay, this is the potential. Here is something new that can fit in. I will invest into that. And then that matures and builds up the market further on.
So let's take that. And again, now I think you did a very good job of kind of giving us the macro statement, but on your level and the company level. And I think this is a challenge that not all startups have to deal with, right? Like there are startups that, if you, I'll take a step back. The market exists. I'm supplying it, right? Like I'm making a different burger, right? I'm the in and out against McDonald's. Like people eat burgers, right? That's not a question. There's burgers, right? And I'm a search engine back in the days. I'm OpenAI or one of us. But I'm creating the market in a way, right? I'm inventing the technology. By inventing the technology, I'm creating the market and sort of right. Here, the market exists, but the economics or the payment methods, the way the money transfer doesn't quite exist, and I need government policy, right? Government policy or some other creative way to get about it. So how do you tackle it as the CEO of this innovative company, but in this, I would say, even extreme situation?
First of all, let me correct the terminology here. The market doesn't exist. The problem exists.
The problem exists. Fair enough. Fair enough. Like if there's no question, people need like. I mean, what I mean to say, it's like
No, it's
like
it's a very
the productization of a market does not exist, right? In the capitalistic sense,
right.
Yeah.
Because that's my challenge. So put aside the small lakes and ponds, that are at the responsibility of water utilities or municipalities or private people or private organizations. Let's talk about countries or states at the very bare minimum, where the problem is really big, substantial.
Safety, water safety, national water safety
at all levels, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you look with a microscope, you will not find lakes around the world with a budget line that says to treat. So for starters, if you put yourself in the shoes of a legislature or a government, right, you're asking them to allocate from an already stretched budget. Everybody has, nobody has too much money. And so you're asking them to reallocate from something that they think is important to something else that they should think is important, that none of their predecessors has ever treated, and now they're being asked to do that. It's not an easy undertaking unless there is a very good political reason to do it. For example, in the state of Florida that I mentioned before. And so unless there is a very strong...
But is that because it was so clear, so visually appealing as a statewide issue? Or like what made it so clear in Florida?
It could be in the case of Florida, yes. It was the election of Governor DeSantis on the heels of a very bad year in terms of harmful algal blooms, and everybody was suffering. So there was an outcry, it was demanded. And every year there are these annual ceremonies of everybody getting pissed off that there's a bloom from here and a bloom from there, and you can't breathe, and you can't allow your grandchildren in the water, and dogs are dying. So this is an ongoing kind of noise that somebody wants it quiet and is willing to put money and allocate money into the solution. But in most cases, you're kind of competing with other priorities, and they don't consider water a priority. Or they don't consider it unless you come and start educating them to make it a priority, to allocate the budget, change regulation. Complicated, for a small company like ours, I do it. But it's very, very complicated for a small company at the government level to do all these activities to the point that you created yourself a market niche. Very complicated, very expensive, very time consuming, all the things that a company like mine should hate, and the investors should hate even more. Going back to the original sin, to the fundamental problem. It's an uninvestable investment.
I mean, what can be appealing if you become the market at some point, and then that's very appealing, right? So
absolutely.
That's the dream. That's the dream.
I used to go to investors very proudly and tell them, BlueGreen is at the tip of the spear, and behind us there is no stick, only to see them running away screaming. And I didn't understand. I said, I don't get it. We're solving such a major problem. Everybody needs our solution everywhere around the world. I attach a huge dollar value to the problem, not to the market, but to the problem. See the potential? No. That was the situation. So that was very, very challenging, very frustrating. And we had to grow up a company in I'm saying this carefully, hundreds of billions of dollars market potential. The end of the line, not being able to raise substantial amounts of money. It was always very difficult all the time, kind of grassroots, build it, with a lot of blood and sweat and lots of volunteers around because it's fun what we're doing. So we had all these people wanting to join because it's really a lot of fun. It feels good to clean up water, but generally speaking, very, very difficult to raise institutional money. That was always very, very difficult. But, we plowed through, we managed, and from one project to the next, and then we became commercial. So we started selling and more and more. So you're starting to build kind of an ecosystem and make a point we're here to stay. We're going to solve this problem, even if it takes a little bit longer. But it also forced us to start being a little bit more creative because it became very clear that the answer to our needs as a company that wants to grow fast is not in B2G. I mean, we work in B2G all the time, and we make progress all the time, but it's not a hockey stick. It's not where you're saying, okay, now I can scale like crazy and save the world's problems. It's not. And if I wait based on governments paying us, good luck with that. So it's not going to give us scale. So we need to find alternatives.
Unless none of the medium shot.
Exactly. And so we needed to find a different way to gain scale. And that came due to the realization that harmful algal blooms, because they are a low common denominator in so many different problems associated with climate at large, can solve so many different problems where you can find money. So the immediate aspect was carbon. Carbon
Mhm.
market evolving really fast as a potential market. The demand to carbon credits and to carbon offsets is growing really fast. And at the same time, the supply doesn't. So there is a huge market gap to get yourself into. If we're able to generate a lot of carbon credits somehow, then that's your source of revenue. This is not a B2G anymore, and it has nothing to do with water quality. Because remember, nobody's caring enough.
Isn't bacteria methane, bacteria that water create carbon gas? Is that an issue? Like, okay, so, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Like, how is that connected?
So different pathways. Let me go one step backwards.
Yeah.
Explain what photosynthetic microorganisms do in water. I mentioned they do a lot of photosynthesis. They generate a lot of oxygen. They capture a lot of carbon naturally. Under bloom conditions, even more so, to the point that the natural carbon pump in water breaks. They create, when you come to the water and there's a lot of scum on the water, that's a lot of dead biomass. I don't want to go too technical here, but bottom line, the carbon pump breaks. So it's inefficient. From being hyper efficient, it breaks to the point that it's not efficient enough. This is problem number one. Problem number two, when that happens, another thing is starting to grow, and that is other type of greenhouse gas emissions. So when you have all that biomass and all that biomass is dying, decaying, growing, dying, decaying, growing, a lot of methane and nitrous oxide
methane. That's
is coming out of the lake. So instead of water body being a carbon sink, it turns into a carbon source. More greenhouse gas, more potent greenhouse gas is being emitted than being captured. And that is when everything breaks down. And that is really the worst of all. Not only it's not capturing enough carbon, it's even releasing worse greenhouse gas while doing so. When we do what we do, we fix that, because we take all the carbon that was caught by all the biomass. When it dies, it sinks to the bottom. What does it mean that water is a carbon sink? It means anything organic dies in water, sinks to the bottom, part biodegrades, part compacts into the sediment, and will stay there until it will turn into oil or natural gas in millions of years. So that portion, if we can calculate it, that can generate what's known as carbon removals, how we lock that biomass away for all eternities. These are carbon removals we can claim and generate carbon credits from.
and you are able to do this today?
Yes.
Okay.
In addition to that, when we rehabilitate the aquatic ecosystem, methane and nitrous oxide drops, the emissions. Think of it as a chimney that you put a filter on top or shut it down altogether. And so between the baseline, which is very high, and the new baseline, which is much lower, everything in between you can claim as avoidances, as carbon avoidances. You can claim carbon credits for those as well, which means we are in a position to generate a lot of carbon credits, which is a byproduct, what we really want to do, which is clean up water.
And is that enough to cover the cost, or it's mostly an issue of subsidizing the program?
So the way we see this conceptually should give us enough profit to keep doing it.
Okay.
So what
to the level you can say, give me the credit, I'll do it
for free.
For free. Just give me the credit.
And that's exactly what we're doing. In our vision, moving forward, because remember what's our mission statement? We make water safe. I'm not here for the carbon credits.
But it's a way to finance the operation. I'm just wondering, sounds super interesting, but just like how real is this? I mean, have you already done it? Are you close to doing it? Like, where are you in this in this process?
So when we realize that we're able to generate carbon credits from water treatment, and that can be a blended financing mechanism for us to do more water treatments, we went ahead to register a first generation of a methodology. So if you want to generate carbon credits, you need to validate a methodology or an algorithm of what you need to measure in order to, at the end of the equation, come up with the number of credits that you removed or avoided, or you name it.
And so for people who don't know, who approves this?
There is a handful of standards around the world. The big names are Vera and Gold Standard, but there are others that have the expertise to understand what you're doing, what are the consequences, the benefits, and the unintended consequences also. Everything is taken into consideration to generate a number of carbon credits.
Yeah.
And then if you're a project developer, let's take something that is easy. Forget water for a second. Let's say everybody knows that a forest in a place that did not have a forest before is a good idea to capture carbon. So there is a methodology behind it to calculate how much carbon you can generate on an annual basis over the lifespan of that project. So if I'm a project developer, I raise funds for that project. I buy, rent, whatever, so many thousands of hectares of land. I plant the trees and I start growing, managing the forest, and claim carbon credits every year and selling them. That's the business. It's a business that is designed to A, generate carbon credits so I can make money, and B, maybe grow a forest where there wasn't before and should be, and then there are other benefits from a forest. So same with water. Problem with water, few people understand water. Going back to the underlying, the original sin, right? We don't really understand water very well. So how do you quantify how many you really remove? Because I told you, water is a carbon sink. Some biodegrade, some compact into the sediment, but how much? That's a huge debate. If we want to measure the reduction of methane, where exactly do you measure and how much?
Yeah.
These are all sorts of very, very complicated questions. So when we started off, we said, okay, where can we find what's easiest, cheapest for us to move forward? And we found an up and coming standard, very aggressive, that wanted to move forward with something new. They liked the idea. We put together a methodology. It was published in March of 2023. And we figured, okay, now we need to test it. What does it really mean to do a carbon project? Because we've been treating lakes for many, many months, years before. I've never done a full carbon project. A carbon project is complicated because contrary to water treatment, just water treatment, it's not just at all, but contrary to just water treatment, the carbon project, you need to bring a lot of third parties to validate many different parameters that otherwise maybe you don't even need to, and go through an entire process of measurement, verification, and certification of those carbon credits so that they can say, oh, this is the amount of tons of CO2 equivalents that you have generated in that process. It's very, very complicated and expensive. But we never had the experience of doing anything like it. So we had no idea what to expect. Should we expect to 100 tons per acre or 1,000 tons or 1 ton? No idea. And of course, that dictates the financial feasibility of the entire model. So we needed to do something about that. And we decided in August of 2023 to do a first kind of quick and dirty project, which we chose to do in Manual Reservoir in Utah. And that's a 500-acre, very contaminated 500-acre lake that we asked for something small and badly blooming and said, oh, Manual Reservoir. Okay. So we went there and that was a very interesting experience. Just to explain how interesting, I need to go a little bit backwards so people understand for context, what does it mean to do a carbon project? Normally it takes, because of the complication of a carbon project, it takes years to prepare for a carbon project and years to execute. In our case, we're dealing with water. You would expect at least that because water is a hyper-regulated environment. So on top of everything that I just told you, you also need a lot of stakeholders to say yes.
Yeah.
You need the government, the regulator, the local authority, the people on the front line of everybody to say yes, because otherwise everybody will scream to high head. It took us, so the benchmark is years to prepare. It took us 7 weeks to put 7 weeks to get everybody on board, just to show you how bad the problem is and how badly everybody wants a solution, a free one on top of everything, right? You don't get that kind of an offer. 7 weeks to get all the contracts, the third parties, the stakeholders to buy in.
Amazing.
Amazing. It meant of a 500-acre lake, which is very difficult under standard circumstances to treat, if at all. Never been treated before, by the way, that lake. Took us a couple of hours on September 25th to treat. Follow up 10 days. The lake was clean on October 5th. You can see the pictures. You don't need to have PhD in limnology. It's clear. From visibility zero, thick green algae bloom to transparent water you can see all the way down to the bottom. And so that was quick. And then we got all the data, and then you need to accumulate all the data that you send to labs, come back, yada, yada, yada. Took us another 6 months just to do the calculation.
Yeah.
We ended up with certifying nearly 13,000 tons of CO2 equivalents. Now, that number shouldn't mean anything to anybody until you put it in perspective. The total number of carbon credits, high quality carbon credits generated in 2023 was less than 130,000. So we were able to generate in one day, in one place, 10% of what the whole world generated throughout the entirety of 2023.
And you got paid for it?
No, or only in part. And this is a different challenge because remember, this was a quick and dirty. It was a small registry. There are a lot of issues around carbon credits and who wants to buy what, and people are very selective. So put that aside. But this is not the important thing. We didn't make it to sell it. We made it to figure it out.
Got it.
As far as we were concerned, we
Okay.
started this whole operation assuming that if we get 1,000 tons out of this, that would be amazing. We ended up with 13,000 tons, which basically gives us the infrastructure to say, okay, what do we need now? Okay, this is uncommercial, but why? Because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we need to fix it, and we are fixing it in part by being able to partner with bigger standards that have much better market visibility. And we also changed the standards. So the quality of the carbon credits is much better. The numbers are more accurate. The time frame is better. Many different aspects. It took us another 2 years to do that. So it's not, it's not a stroll in the park. But I think we're very close to completing that journey.
Amazing.
But once that happens, then my argument is that based on our effort to clean up the world's waters, we can bridge the gap, the huge gap between supply and what is truly demanded or required by the world in order to bring the world on a path towards net zero, which we're nowhere near today.
We're nowhere near.
And this is very exciting because it's not based on handouts or philanthropy or anything like that, rather a very strong business model where I can clean up those lakes for free for those underserved communities on the one hand.
And get paid for carbons. Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. So what is that the picture? So that is the future in your view, or that's the vision. So what do you like? Where do you want to be? Like, I'm not say it's the next few years kind of thing. Where do you see the company?
So I see two exogenous events converging in the next couple of years. I think anybody who has a little bit of understanding in climate can agree on that. The first one is the carbon markets.
Mm-hmm.
They are immature, they are hectic, they are problematic, but they are going to mature. And you can have as much criticism as you want over COP28 or COP29 or COP30, but you can see the trend. The world is consolidating. The regulators are getting into the playground. It's happening. It's happening. And this is a market that is already worth tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars today, and is expected to become a market of trillions of dollars in the coming decades. So it's fast growing. It's a very nice place to be in. And the demand is overshadowing by far the supply. And this is where we want to find ourselves fitting in within a whole range of other solutions. So this is one exogenous event. It has nothing to do with organic growth or anything. It's just something that if we don't tackle today, we're going to hit the consequences in the future. And BlueGreen, because we are fixing a water problem, we are sitting on two different layers of that solution. One of them is what is called climate mitigation in the context of carbon. How do we reduce and remove all that carbon in the atmosphere? But also climate adaptation, because as temperatures increase, as water sources become depleted, those problems are exacerbated. So we're not only solving or being part of the solution to the problem of carbon in the atmosphere or greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, we are also part of the solution when we failed to deal with climate change. How do we deal now with depleting water sources and contaminating and fast contaminating water sources? Which brings me to the second exogenous event that I started with, the water markets. Those didn't exist until recently. As we move forward and as these problems become worse, then the world is becoming more attentive to the fact that water is something that is very much investable. Because here is a simple example. A couple of months ago, people maybe are not aware of this, but a couple of months ago, we were this close to a nuclear war between India and Pakistan at the very base over water. So what's it worth to the world to invest in avoiding a nuclear war? Just asking.
A few dollars.
A few dollars, right?
A few dollars.
When you understand that many conflicts around the world, if
Or
we
a
look,
few rupees, if we want to be exact.
if you look closer to our neighborhood, right? The civil war in Syria started over water. And so there are many, many examples like that. And when you understand that and you're starting to attach a dollar value to that, and it has already been done, then UN issued a report that is saying that water security is going to put in jeopardy 60% or around $58 trillion in global GDP. That's the consequence of water insecurity. Now you have a dollar sign next to it. This
And
will
even
hit
if it's not the exact amount, it's a big number. That's what I
a very
think.
big
What's
number.
important. Yeah, yeah.
It's a very big number. And the important thing is not that it's a very big number, because it was always a big number. The important thing is that the world is starting to pay attention. And so if we're looking at if we're going back to the numbers that are relevant to us and companies like us that have innovative solutions for all of these problems, what are we doing about this? Because we can't raise money. So here is where the problem is starting to fix itself. Because if we look at 2024, the total amount of money that was invested in innovation, venture capital, was about $0.3 trillion. The total amount of money invested into climate was 50 billion with a B, $50 billion, 1/6. But the total amount of money invested in water was $500 million with an A. So that's how much attention and money was given to water not so long ago, in 2024. This year alone, the EU is committing $15 billion to water security, and it's getting a very big chunk of trillions of dollars that are now being planned for the coming years. And so you're starting to realize that water is starting to get the right
The
attention.
change is coming.
And so when I'm looking at this from a strategic perspective, what's going to happen in the next, I'd say, 3 to 7 years is that the carbon markets are going to mature, in the water markets are going to mature, and there's going to be a drive in that direction. And we are sitting in a very good place, kind of front seat row, to enjoy both of them, but not just us, but companies like us that are even thinking about the next solution for those big problems, because that's what we need. We need a forward-looking visionaries in that space. I'm not talking about ourselves. I'm talking about all these people out there that have great ideas and complete inability to raise money for those ideas. And that's what I want to end with a word of optimism. It's happening. There is a lot of room to bridge that gap and make a lot of money in this process.
So I think that was like a very kind of, I think we did a tour de force kind of a subject matter with this end. But before we sign off, I kind of want, I think we talked a lot about water. We talked a lot about the challenges that you guys are dealing specifically and the different ways you're trying to attack it and deal with it. But I want to talk a bit about Eyal Entrepreneur. So it's a bit Eyal Entrepreneur. There's a question I like to ask, even though I won't say my caveat, but it's like that. I'll just ask it. Is that like, yeah, do you think entrepreneurs are made or are they born?
Wow. I think entrepreneurs are made. Lots of circumstances, and many of them are not good. So I think it's all about grit, or not all about, but a lot about grit and persistence. If you break the problem a little bit in a different way, okay, if you take it out of the entrepreneurship world and you think about what's impact, and there's a lot of sociological studies that are done around that. How many people do you need to make a change? The answer is very small, like about 3-5% of persistent group of people can make huge change. By the way,
Because
both good and bad. We're seeing
because they push, right? Because they push and then they get another 10%, 25% that does the tipping.
There's a shift in that direction, right? So if there's a very small group of very persistent people, and I think this is also true with entrepreneurs, the ones that can withhold a lot of problems that are going to be coming your way. It's I think I don't want to say we, because how successful I am, it's debatable, but I would argue that good successful entrepreneurs at large are measured by their ability to take lots of punches, get up and continue doing what they believe is the right way to do things.
A good entrepreneur is an alive entrepreneur. Let's begin with that. It's like in all senses of the word. So you did say, so I think what I like about the question is not because what I think it's true, what I think is right. It's because I think it tells a lot about the person answering it and how they think about it. So what made you, so you said entrepreneurs are made, so what made Eyal?
Well, you can attach it to every point in my life, but if I need to go to later stages, then in my history, then that would, or you know what, I can go early. Okay, my parents will really agree that from early on, I was really a stubborn, annoying kid. Whether I was right or not, I was very
The academic term is disagreeable.
contrarian, I would say,
Contrarian,
contrarian. And so fast forward, when I got finished school, I went to law school, and my technical background is this. I'm not technical at all. I'm coming from legal and business academic background. So when I went to law school, I had really, really bad grades because I didn't like the way that, they were teaching you to answer questions. I am unable to make myself answer the way others want me to answer. I like my way and I will stand behind it, even if that means that I get bad scores. But that came with the fundamental underlying problem, which is if I continue down that path, I will never be accepted to any decent internship and forget about, master's degree or anything like that. Right?
yeah.
So I had to kind of recalculate and recalibrate real quickly. And then end of first year, I decided that I would start studying another program, and I went to study East Asian studies. And that was really cool, a lot of fun, kind of improved also my grades. But it pushed me in a very different directions, because if I thought initially that I wanted to be a lawyer, I realized I'm much more interested in kind of understanding the world and the business world and all that. And so I went to China and I studied Chinese. And then afterwards I went to Hong Kong to study East Asian I had to study for an MBA in Hong Kong. And kind of all led me to, learning about business, but not the normal easy way,
Yeah.
right? Maybe not so easy, but usually if you ask somebody who wants to do business, they'll go to the best school available, and then they'll look for an Ivy League in the United States, because that's what you do. And from there, they'll go to get a job with a big consulting firm or investment bank. And I didn't do any of that, right? So I was actually more looking for the niches. I always liked unfair advantages, and I thought this is something interesting. It's an up and coming. This is before China became a thing, and so that was very interesting. So it was always this kind of contrarian, and I see an opportunity and I need to go that way. That kind of led me. Whether it was smart or not, again, the jury's still out. I'm very young. We'll
Young,
see.
charming, and good looking with a beautiful haircut, right? That's
Exactly. And so water was so. And I started a business that had to do with technology transfer transactions into China. And then the opportunity came with water, and we started BlueGreen, and that was a lot of fun and excitement, and a huge undertaking and challenge. But it was also, I think, in part, and this is what I'm saying, it's all circumstantial. Cleaning up water, in addition to it being a lot of fun, is just so damn important. Right.
Yeah.
And so if there is anything that keeps me awake at night, is the responsibility. Are we doing this fast enough and at scale enough to get that solution out there? And so this to me is a very driving motivator, not to stop, not to give up, and keep plowing through to get this where it needs to be, to the attention of people in governments and organizations, and to generate these solutions to these people.
So I think it's a good place to wrap up. Thank you very much.
Go quickly.
Yeah, time flies when you're having fun.
It's a wrap. This Ageas podcast episode ends here, but you don't. Now, is it crazy to think that you know somebody who'd love this episode? Share it with them, and they'll love you for it.